America is becoming an increasingly miserable country. Happiness records in the US had reached all-time lows, with only 48% of the population in 2020 claiming to be satisfied with their lives. Still, dissatisfaction isn't the same as outright misery, right? Wrong. At least, it's wrong for the poor people living in cities like Philadelphia, New York, and Las Vegas, which are among the most miserable that the United States has to offer. In this video, we're going to explore the 10 most miserable cities in the country. And if you live in any of them, it's maybe a good idea to have the movers on speed dial. We'll start with a city that's been miserable for a long time. Philadelphia. The city of brotherly love isn't looking quite so friendly these days, as it's been dealing with increasing crime for several years. That may seem strange for a city where homicides dropped by 20%, falling from 514 in 2022 to 410 in 2023. But it's not murder you have to worry about in Philly. The city is a hotbed for property crimes. Retail and vehicle thefts shot up in 2023, hitting a 20-year high. So while you're less likely to be killed in Philly, your wheels are more likely to be snatched out from under you. Poverty is still a problem, hitting 21.7% in 2022, leaving around a fifth of the city's people living below the breadline. The problem is even worse for kids. 29% of people under 18 in Philadelphia have experienced poverty to some degree. It's not a surprise that so many of the residents want an escape, and for many, that comes in the form of drugs. The city saw around 1,300 unintentional drug overdoses in 2023. Still, at least the people in Philly aren't choking on their own air, which is more than we can say for our next city, Las Vegas. When you think of Vegas, you think of the glitz and glamour of the Strip, the casinos, and the many amazing shows held in the city every year. You don't think of air pollution so bad that it has the potential to cause cancer. The American Lung Association gives the city an F for the quality of its air, ranking it 31st out of 223 American metropolitan areas. In 2020, the same organization also ranked it as the 9th most polluted American city based on its ozone levels. So, come to Vegas. Asthma, strokes, heart attacks, and lung cancer await. And if you manage to survive the terrible air, you might find that you can't even get enough water to keep yourself alive. The Las Vegas Valley gets 90% of its water from Lake Mead, which has seen its levels drop by 150 feet since January of 2000. And they're only going to get lower. Add in Vegas having a cost of living that's 10.6% higher than the American average, despite average household income being almost $66,000 a year, and you get a recipe for abject misery. But if we're going to talk about poverty, our next city takes the cake: Detroit. With an average income of just $14,984 a year, the Motor City's approximately 630,000 residents are dealing with a major economic crisis. The city has a poverty rate of just under 34%, which is more than 2 times higher than Michigan's average of around 13%, and even further ahead of the 2022 national average of 11.5%. If you want anything resembling a comfortable life, Detroit is far from the city where you want to be. People are already leaving the city at an alarming rate, with its population having dropped massively from the 1.8 million people who called it home in 1950. That's an almost 65% decline between 1950 and today, which means that Detroit is on shaky economic ground. The city's Downtown Development Authority needs to find $571 million from somewhere just to cover the bonds it has pledged against tax capture. And naturally, this lack of money leads to more crime. Detroit had a violent crime rate of over 2,000 crimes per 100,000 people in 2022. That's a long way ahead of similar metropolitan areas such as Austin, Texas, which has a crime rate that's around a quarter of that seen in Detroit. Are there any cities that have a worse crime rate than Detroit? Well, Cleveland comes close. Ohio's second largest city experiences around 16 violent crimes per 1,000 people, and almost 43 property crimes per 1,000 residents. That's still higher than the national average, with the crime issue made even worse by the fact that the city has a median annual household income of about $39,000. That shouldn't come as a surprise. Ohio ranked 45th out of America's 50 states for economic growth between the fourth quarter of 2021 2021 and the third quarter of 2023, with cities like Cleveland being heavily affected. The problem stems from the city's shift away from the manufacturing sector on which it was built. The city has a poverty rate of 31% that, when combined with a massive pool of workers who dedicated their lives to a crumbling manufacturing base, means an undereducated population can't take advantage of new employment opportunities. And if you want to escape it all in Cleveland, you can't even rely on good weather. Summers are humid, winters are below freezing, and tornadoes are becoming more common. Cleveland recorded 4 of them in one day in August 2024 alone. Of course, smaller cities aren't the only ones being blighted by poverty in the US. In fact, the country's most famous city is being blighted by a poverty epidemic that makes it completely miserable. It's the jewel in the American crown, but it's looking more tarnished every day. It's New York City. If you can make it there, you can make it anywhere. But the fact is that a huge portion of New York City's 8.3 million people are barely scraping by. A family of 4 needs to earn over $318,000 annually to live comfortably, thanks to the city's massive cost of living. In 2022, the average New York City household made just over $76,000, less than a quarter of what it needs to stay comfortable. New Yorkers are living in a time when the gap between the poorest and the richest in the city is higher than it's been for almost 2 decades. The richest New Yorkers make around 53 times more than the poorest, showcasing a level of inequality seen almost nowhere else in the US. Is it any wonder that 37% of the city's residents refused to classify their living conditions as excellent or good in a March 2024 survey? Still, at least New Yorkers have their health. That's more than we can say for the people of Montgomery, Alabama. The city comes dead last in advisory's rankings for the number of healthy restaurants in the city. That may not seem like a big deal until you realize that the lack of healthy restaurants contributes to the city's residents having an average life expectancy of just over 73 years, more than 2 years below the national average. That's probably a symptom of almost 12% of Montgomery's population having no health insurance. Around 21% of Montgomery's residents are in poor health compared to the 17% American average. Even its babies are suffering. 13% of them are born underweight compared to 8% in the rest of America. Still, at least Montgomery's health dangers aren't a direct result of crime. That's more than we can say for the next city, Memphis. The city is rife with gangs, many of which are concentrated in its poorer black neighborhoods. Around 100 gangs operate in Memphis, combining to have 13,400 members, and they're mostly responsible for a gun crime epidemic that's consuming the city. The problem has gotten so bad that the city recorded just under 400 homicide victims in 2023, which is more than double the number it reported in 2018. As of March of 2024, the city has already recorded around 40 homicides and 600 major violent crimes, with the latter figure representing a 17-year high. Why is all of this crime happening? Well, Memphis is home to around 45,000 out-of-work adults aged between 16 and 24, with only 1% on the path toward earning a living wage by the time they're 28. That is true misery, which explains why Memphis recorded 3,500 major property crimes in January 2024 alone as its people turned on each other. Maybe Los Angeles fares a little better. With a population of over 3.8 million people, LA is America's second largest city by population. And like Montgomery, it has a problem with gangs. 45,000 people count themselves as members of the 450 gangs in the city. While it's hard to pin down a singular reason for the presence of these gangs, LA's cost of living certainly doesn't help. It's the 4th most expensive city in the world, with a studio apartment in LA easily costing around $2,000 a month to rent. If you have any intention of starting a family in LA, then good luck. The median house price in the city is an eye-watering $1.2 million. Given just how much it costs to simply live in Los Angeles, it shouldn't be surprising that the city has a major homelessness problem. The city counted just over 45,000 6,000 of its residents as homeless in 2023, representing a 10% rise on the 2022 figure. Of course, Los Angeles is far from the only city that's miserable because of a cost of living crisis. San Antonio has it just as bad, with 53% of its families claiming that they're cost-burdened, which means that over 30% of their income goes toward basic household necessities. And as we've already seen so many times in this list, those increased costs create a poverty issue. Almost 18% of people in San Antonio live below the poverty line. And that crushing sense of never being able to get ahead in life is having a clear impact on the city's residents. Bexar County alone experienced a 33% increase in suicide rates between 2005 and 2023. And if you manage to climb above all of that to live a somewhat decent life in San Antonio, then there's bad news on the horizon. Being in the San Antonio basin is going to create serious problems for you in the future. The city already has to deal with floods, with the next 30 years going to see around 37,000 of the city's properties come under risk of flooding. For context, that's almost 18% of all the properties in the city. But what is the most miserable US city of all? That dubious honor goes to the small city of Gary in Indiana. Gary has collapsed from the vibrant manufacturing hub into a city of just 69,000 people, a huge number of which aren't in the workforce. The city has an almost 10% unemployment rate, around twice that of Indiana as a whole, and it hit a staggering rate of 23% back in April of 2020. It all comes down to the collapse of the city's steel industry, which went from supporting a population of 180,000 in the 1960s to little more than husks of old buildings and a rapidly evacuating population today. The situation got so bad for Gary that it was once declared the murder capital of the United States in the 1990s. Things have gotten a little better on the crime front since then, though it's still a dangerous city. 1 in every 32 of its people will experience some form of property crime, such as burglary or vehicle theft, with the city not being helped by its median household income of around $35,000, almost $50,000 less than the national average. Whether it's rampant poverty, high crime rates, or inequality on a scale rarely seen in the US, these cities make it tough for their residents to call themselves happy Americans. Do you live in any of the cities we've covered here? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And as always, thanks for watching and take care out there.